On June 18th, the Supreme Court released its long-awaited decision on DACA, the United States Department of Homeland Security versus the Regents of the University of California. Now, what we know is that the Trump administration illegally tried to terminate the DACA program. What's murky is how we got to that decision. This is a complicated topic, so bear with me. Let's start off with what is DACA. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was President Barack Obama's attempt to address the problem of the millions of immigrant children who were brought to the United States by their parents illegally, who had grown up in the United States, who grew up learning English, and who, quite frankly, knew no other country other than the United States as their home. Now, this had been a problem for years because these children who were becoming adults had no legal status in the United States and were limited in a number of things that they could do. They were limited, for example, in gaining lawful employment. They were limited in their ability to go to school. And Congress had done nothing, even though they'd been pressed for years. So there was legislation called the DREAM Act, which had been pending in Congress for years, that would have addressed the problem and would have given the children some kind of legal status in the United States. But again, Congress never had the backbone to pass that legislation. So in 2012, Barack Obama essentially got fed up, and he used his power to grant deferred action. Deferred action is the power basically to say that, yes, I, the president, know that you are here in the United States without legal immigration status, and I am choosing not to deport you. Now, Barack Obama used his authority to grant deferred action and essentially created a program. The program was that if you applied and met certain conditions, then you could get a promise that you would not be deported, and you could get work authorization. This program allowed millions of otherwise unauthorized immigrants in the United States to come out of the shadows and to get a job, to pay taxes, to go to school. But there was one huge problem. DACA is not law. DACA is not based on law. And because of that, even though DACA recipients had the ability to work and had the ability to go to school, they never received any legal status. And as you can imagine, this was a very controversial thing for Barack Obama to do. It did become an issue in the 2012 presidential election. And there is some legitimate criticism that Barack Obama may have overstepped his authority by creating a program out of whole cloth using his authority to grant deferred action. Because generally, deferred action is something that you grant on a case-by-case basis, but he actually created a whole new program with requirements that USCIS applied as if they were law. And of course, another huge problem with the program is that it was a matter of the president's discretion that created it, and it would be a matter of the president's discretion to terminate it, which means that the people who received DACA were going to be at the mercy of any new presidential administration on whether or not they were able to remain in the United States without being deported. And from an immigration standpoint, the absolute worst nightmare happened in 2016. We got President Donald Trump. Now, DACA is actually a very popular program, even though its legality is somewhat questionable. An overwhelming majority of Americans want to see something done to allow the dreamers, the people who came here as children, to stay here legally. And even President Trump had expressed his support for DACA recipients. However, President Trump's first Attorney General was Jeff Sessions. Yes, the Jeff Sessions that Trump now highly criticizes. And Jeff Sessions was highly supportive of Donald Trump's policy to enforce immigration law more strictly. Heck, even Donald Trump's current advisor, Stephen Miller, used to work for Jeff Sessions. So Jeff Sessions issued an opinion that DACA was actually illegal and unconstitutional. In response, the Department of Homeland Security attempted to terminate the program. When it was terminated, it became the subject of numerous lawsuits, and those lawsuits resulted in temporary injunctions to prevent the United States from revoking DACA status to those who had received it and starting deportation proceedings. So now the issue came to the Supreme Court. The only thing I can say for sure about this decision is that the court was unanimous in the judgment. That is, the court was unanimous in saying that by trying to terminate DACA, the Trump administration acted illegally. But the reasoning is a little hard to understand. And that is because of the fractured nature of this opinion. The opinion of the court was written by Chief Justice Roberts. A total of 5 justices joined into at least parts of Justice Roberts' opinion. So we can argue that that's the opinion of the court, but there were 3 other opinions where justices dissented in part and concurred in part, and they were joined in one way or another by 4 justices, which really made the entire reasoning fractured and difficult to follow. What we do know is what Chief Justice Roberts wrote. He said that the acting Secretary of Homeland Security acted arbitrarily and capriciously in terminating the DACA program. He first said that it was appropriate for the Department of Homeland Security to accept the Attorney General's decision that DACA was illegal, but that didn't answer the entire question. And that's because the DACA program involved the exercise of discretion in a lot of ways. It could involve, for example, weighing whether a particular person had a hardship because of being deported. It also involved determining whether the issuance of benefits such as work authorization was appropriate in certain cases. And in all those cases, even if DACA itself was illegal, the Secretary of Homeland Security had discretion to decide what to do. And it's an abuse of discretion if you fail to recognize that you even have the discretion. So, since the acting Secretary of Homeland Security never really got to that point, never really concluded whether or not she had the discretion to consider the benefits and to consider whether DACA was appropriate on a case-by-case basis, the total termination of the program was therefore an abuse of discretion. It was arbitrary and capricious. So where do we go from here? Well, first, we need to understand that DACA was a popular program. This is an election year. Terminating DACA right now may not be the savviest of political moves. On the other hand, we've already seen that Trump is appealing to his base. And as I've shown before, his base is essentially uneducated white people. So terminating DACA now would only appeal to his base. One thing is clear: the only way to ensure that the Dreamers have a stable legal status is for Congress to act. Congress has to pass some kind of legislation. But again, in an election year, I highly doubt Mitch McConnell is going to cooperate with any Democrats on any legislation, let alone something that would be as controversial, particularly in his district, as legalizing DACA. So right now, we're probably going to see the status quo. That is, DACA is still out there. People will still be able to renew their statuses. In the meantime, we're not going to get a clear resolution on what legal immigration status Dreamers have. If you feel generous enough to make a small one-time donation, you can do so through PayPal. I'll have instructions in the description below. A non-tax deductible donation will go to a special needs trust set up for my benefit that will help pay my